morning, everyone. I'm Bridget Hadley, Economic Development Manager in the City of Omaha Planning Department.
Good morning, I'm Pat Evans. I'm the Community Development Manager. My staff and I manage the CDBG, home, and ESG funding for the Planning Department.
So I will talk about tax increment financing and touch a little bit on PACE financing, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy program. Tax increment financing has been utilized tremendously in the City of Omaha as a tool to incentivize, encourage economic development, but also to support some of our community redevelopment efforts. And I do want to just put a plug in real quick for National Development Council. I received my Economic Development Finance Professional Certificate from that organization a few years ago, and I am just really so grateful that Spark has brought them into our city to be a partner and resource. I didn't know how to accomplish that, but I thank you, Spark, for doing that, because I think we need more national partners to help us with our various economic development efforts and certainly community redevelopment efforts. So thank you, Corey, for being a part of this, and that is no discredit or not to not acknowledge. I think it is Fannie Mae, but thank you for the partners, all of the partners. So I am going to try to share my screen. Let's see how well I do. Yeah, computer sound optimize. I am on a completely different system, so let's see if this works.
Looks good. We have your web browser up.
Yeah. Now let's see. Maybe I'll just have to start all over and do it this way. And I didn't want to do it this way, but I guess this way can work. And there. All right. Okay, so does everyone see the screen?
Yep, we're good.
All right. So I won't read everything on every screen, because I know everyone can read, but I'd like to start out with what is tax increment financing, and kind of give a definition and general synopsis of, well, what is it? As I've mentioned, it's an incentive tool to encourage private investment, and it is only for projects that are located in what we call community redevelopment areas. They were formerly known as substandard and blighted areas that, you know, Michael, I don't call you Michael, Mike Moylan is very familiar with that term. When I came on board, we were crucified when we went to some public meetings. I won't say which ones in particular. And I found out that there was a term in our community development law called community redevelopment area. And I said, we're going to use that word. It's less, more palatable, and I think it really describes what we're trying to achieve. Tax increment financing allows local governments to devote all increases in specific property tax revenue to help fund redevelopment project costs. I want to stop right there because I've been working in this program now for 10 to 12 years. I've lost count, and I would describe and explain TIF, tax increment financing, in a very mechanical and technical way. And Mike may remember some of my explanations. It was very much in the weeds. And over the years, I have found that I'm explaining it differently. And even within this year, I've found that I tend to continue to explain it a little bit differently. My hope is that I'm being more simplistic and that I am really conveying what TIF is and what it's doing. And this bullet point, I feel like, really captures it. And we'll talk more about it, but it captures it because tax increment financing, as it says, it is a tool. It is a financing tool as well. I mean, it's helping to offset costs that a developer has already incurred. And that's something that I hadn't really touched on when I first talked about these projects. When someone comes to the city and presents a project that they'd like to redevelop, a property they'd like to redevelop, and they present the project, the scope, part of their whole process and application to the city has to involve the full sources, the capital stack, as some people say, all the money that it takes to develop that project from start all the way to finish where the project is stabilized. So with that in mind, that means the developer has all the risk to make that project happen. And because it says tax increment financing, and again, this bullet point, it's talking about property valuation and property tax revenues. So as they take a property that has a value of X and they redevelop that property, it will create brand new valuation, brand new value, and generate new tax revenues. And it's only that increase in tax revenues that are allowed to be rebated, in effect, back to that developer to help pay back fines, may feel like fines, funding, financing, and in my third bullet point, a lot of times it's banks that are financing these projects, could be other types of financial institutions. They have to repay that debt, and it's repaid by the new taxes that were generated. So these are I would say two new bullet points I've added to hopefully get to the crux early on what is tax increment financing. So as I mentioned, that word, community redevelopment area. What you see on this screen in the light pink, you may say pink, purple, those are the community redevelopment areas that we have designated. I believe this map was updated in January of this year. So as of January of this year, these are all the areas where a property owner who would like to utilize tax increment financing or TIF can use that tool. So as you can see, it goes all the way out. I don't know if you can see my arrow, my mouse arrow, all the way out to Elkhorn, down here to Millard. We go as far south as South Omaha. I think that southern boundary down here touches maybe the Harrison line. But all of this in purple, those are the only areas where the tax increment financing tool can be used. So if someone wants to present us a property that they want to utilize TIF for and is outside of those areas, we would tell them TIF is not available. So that means they cannot use the tool. Now they can request the city to do a study. The study takes about 5 to 6 months to conduct, and you cannot apply for TIF until that study has been completed, presented to the city council, and the city council approves that study. Once the study is approved, then that area, which would include the project that was brought to us that the property owner wants to utilize TIF for, is in, now they can apply for TIF. So if you can imagine time is money. So you've got to really plan out, okay, what is the project I want to create, I want to develop. And when you're thinking about what are all the sources of funds that I need to tap into, money I'm bringing to the table, what are all the processes and the time frame involved in applying for those funds, you got to think about all of that as you're thinking about your project. So as it relates to TIF, if the project is not in one of those areas, you have essentially added another 5 or 6 months onto this process to even apply. And there's no guarantee that a request for a community redevelopment area or CRA study is going to get approved or even will be pursued, but I'm just letting you know you can request that. And I'll take a moment here to also say that you can find this map on Doges, there's a layer for the community redevelopment area, also on our TIF website. And then most recently, last couple of years, and then even this year, there's a new layer called the extremely blighted area layer. And that is a layer that is, I'm going to say, on top of a community redevelopment area layer. The reason I say it's on top of is an extremely blighted area designation is similar to a CRA in that that designation can only be on a property or cover an area that is already in a CRA. So if, and so the EBA, I know acronyms, right? Extremely blighted area. Originally, its purpose was directed toward housing to promote home ownership, because anyone, a property owner, home buyer, let me be specific, who purchases a home in an extremely blighted area would then qualify or could qualify for a state income tax credit up to $5,000. So that's a huge, huge benefit. Secondarily is affordable housing, the promotion of affordable housing in these extremely blighted areas. So that means a developer who is focused on affordable housing, they could apply to the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Funds, and I believe they would receive special financing to apply for those funds to help them develop the housing project. And then most recently this year, there is the TIF term has been increased to 20 years for properties that are within an extremely blighted area. So again, the focus being housing, at least initially. If a property is in an extremely blighted area, there's a possibility that instead of receiving a 15-year term, it can have a 20-year term. So I know that's a lot thrown at you, but just wanted to get that out there. So again, the conversation about TIF, tax increment financing, begins essentially with this right here. Is that property in a community redevelopment area? Once we know that it is in a community redevelopment area, then we can begin talking about the application for TIF. So some of the best practices for TIF across the country are to remove blight, finance public infrastructure, which was the original purpose, at least in Nebraska and in most cases, financing the public infrastructure, because a lot of projects, there's really no value to a property owner to improve the streets, the sidewalks, the curb gutter, no, I shouldn't say intrinsic value, but doesn't really add value to that project necessarily. But when you think of intrinsic value and what we are doing now with our redevelopments, making them pedestrian friendly, our urban design guidelines, the public realm becomes even more important. So any infrastructure within the right of way, so again, sidewalks, curb gutters, the landscaping between the curb and the sidewalk, alleys, streets, all of those are part of the public infrastructure. Sewers, those items are critical to be repaired, installed. And if we've got a project that is utilizing tax increment financing, we want to make sure that the public infrastructure is financed that is adjacent to that project, near that project, or maybe even in the vicinity. We want to make sure that as much of that can be done using the TIF as possible. So here is a basic TIF model that is utilized across the country. You'll see some variations as you look in different communities, counties, states, but the basic model is this. And as I mentioned before, you've got a project or a property that has value on it. So if there is a property that is owned by the city or a tax exempt property and it becomes a part of a TIF project, the beauty of that is it has no tax valuation before the TIF project, but to become a TIF project, it immediately will receive, the assessors will have to assign a tax value to that property. And what that means is this green area right here, that's the tax revenue, which comes from the value of a property, at its state before it becomes a TIF project. So before the TIF project, if it was tax exempt, there was no green. Once it becomes a TIF project, there's green, and that's before the blue. So that's kind of the beauty of those types of projects is it's immediate tax revenue to the taxing jurisdictions to establish a base value, and then all the increase as a result of the actual development of that property, the increase in valuation, thus the increase in tax revenues, are then rebated back to the developer to help pay back the debt service that they incurred to redevelop that project. So that's essentially what this basic model represents. In Omaha, again, the term is generally 15 years. Only certain projects will receive 20 years. So I haven't bothered to update this model yet. But again, if it's a property that is taxable at the time of application, or I'll even say before application, there are always conversations that the city is having with the developer. So Mike has an idea, he wants to develop this property. He's doing a lot of due diligence, aggregating the property, the parcels, talking with other property owners, of course, working with his whole development team, architects, engineers, accountants, lawyers, all of them. He's engaging all of them to, at some point in time before he applies for TIF. Then he's meeting with the city to determine, well, is this project even viable from a redevelopment standpoint, meeting the site regulators. So there's a lot of that that's happening at this stage. So before this beginning of the TIF term. At the point of application would be right before the beginning of the term. The application process, which I'll touch on in just a moment, is about a 5 to 6 month time period. Once the application is approved, we've created a TIF redevelopment project plan and an agreement that the city council approves. The mayor executes that agreement. Now we have a TIF project and construction can begin. Construction can last up to 2 years. In, I would say, more normal cases, typical cases, about 24 months. If it's a rehab, a small project, it may take less than 24 months, may only take 12 months. If it's a multi-phase project like Mike likes to do, it's going to likely take more than 24 months. But nevertheless, during construction, there's generally no new value. At some point in time, though, during this 15-year term, usually by the second, third year of construction, there's new value. And new value means now new tax revenues are coming in. And so again, that's what this turquoise, darker blue section represents. At the end of the term, it just stops. So everything stops. If the project owner's debt service is not repaid, it's not that we're mean spirited, but the law says 15 years, we're done rebating the tax revenues back to your project. So again, they've got to figure all this out and have all this understood when they're initially thinking about their project, that, okay, when this TIF is over, I'm not going to get this money back to pay back debt service. So the cash flow I'm getting from my project needs to be sufficient to cover all of my obligations. So that's essentially what happens at that point in time. And so therefore, at the end of the 15 years, this green section that was only this tall now encompasses the full green and the blue, which means all of this tax revenue is going to the taxing jurisdictions. So that's generally how it works. This has been a great, as it says, a true public-private tool, public-private partnership.
Hey, Bridget, we had a quick question for you. I think it's back on the map. How often are those areas relabeled or renegotiated, and who sets that?
So, when you say renegotiated, if that means, do we eliminate or remove?
Yeah, just changed. Yeah.
Well, so I would say very seldom are they removed or deleted. And I would say because if oops, in this section of the city, there's still not enough redevelopment occurring to accomplish all the goals that we've set out to accomplish. But there are times that there may be a project, maybe it's like, I don't know. So if the question is maybe, is there an amendment to an existing? I would say there probably isn't an amendment to an existing area because there's no need to update the CRA. Once it's a CRA, at least for now,
It stays.
always a CRA. And the reason I say for now, because there is an interim study by our legislature that will be on Friday to, or actually, no, they haven't set up that hearing yet, but there is an interim hearing to look at, are there, is there some kind of logic for maybe decertifying, designating, if you will, a CRA. But so far, if it's once a CRA, it's always a CRA.
And then how do you,
I should say, unless the city decides they want to remove it for whatever.
okay. And then like, what about getting an area added as CRA?
So that's, like I said, the process of if a property owner is, they look at this map, the map on Doges or on our website, a lookup tool on our website, and they see that the property is not in this area, then they can request us
So
to
it's
do.
by request only. It's not like a annual.
Oh, no.
Okay.
It's request only. Takes a lot
Perfect.
of staff time.
I bet. And then we had another question come in. Most of the TIF projects we hear about are new construction, but is TIF, does it support rehabilitation?
Absolutely. So TIF uses.
Perfect
So
segue.
yeah. So one of the bullet points, it says rehabilitation, major renovations, retrofitting. It does not cover normal maintenance and repair costs. So I have to emphasize that because we don't want to use this tool to incentivize some property owner who has deferred their maintenance over a number of years thinking, well, I can just apply for TIF and that new tax revenue will come in and pay for what I should have taken care of over the years. You should, build into your pro forma capital reserve to handle those capital expenditures that are going to occur over a period of time of owning a property. So no, it will not cover normal maintenance and repair costs. So basic renovations, changing the carpet, painting, no, TIF will not cover that. It needs to be some significant major renovations and repurposing of a structure. Taking it from, best examples are what we've seen are taking an office building and converting it to housing, apartments. So that's just one example. So overall community benefits, direct investment in neighborhood communities, direct investment in infrastructure, economic spillover, housing development, as we talked about, conversion of tax exempt property to taxable property, and then of course, annual increase to the property tax base. As something else I haven't talked about enough is when these projects pay off, as you saw, this model depicts, as the projects pay off, all of that tax revenue now is coming back to the taxing jurisdiction. So they may have only for various properties survived, if you will, off of just this amount. Well, for each project that pays off, now there's this delta from this point up to here, whatever that number actually is, that is coming back to all the taxing jurisdictions. So our school districts, our NRD, Natural Resource District, Metropolitan Utility District, City of Omaha. So there is a nice enhancement to the property tax base. Here is the approval process. As I said, overall 150 days, 180 days from the formal application submittal all the way down to when the mayor signs it. So it can be a lengthy process. I know that the state or the legislature approved last year an expedited process. Omaha and Lincoln opted out of that because we feel like the process we have in place is critical and important for evaluating all the projects that we allow the use of TIF for. So I'll breeze through. Here's some examples that I'm sure most of you who live in Omaha and been around Omaha for a while are familiar with. Exarban Village redevelopment area is a great example of the TIF tool being used for an overall redevelopment area. This is when it was the Exarban racetrack. For any of those who are old enough to remember that, I do.
I remember when the rodeos were there.
Oh,
We're in the Exarban area.
I never went to a rodeo there.
Exarban rodeo. Roundups.
And then, so here was the proposal that was shared with Omaha World Herald as to how this site was going to transform to this. And then at the bottom, just a snippet of what it began to look like as it was being completed. Midtown Crossing, I think all of us know about Midtown Crossing. Here's what it used to look like. Mutual of Omaha here. There used to be, I actually have forgotten what used to be here. I do know when I used to eat Kentucky Fried Chicken was right over here. I would go over there for lunch, and I remember hearing about this development, and I thought, well, where am I gonna go eat my Kentucky Fried Chicken? So that's something I always think about when I see this picture. So gone, I don't miss it. And now, of course, what it looks like, a total mixed use redevelopment, just like Exarban Village was, with condos, apartments, retail, office space, and a great public space. And then a project that Mike Moylan is familiar with. And I will say, I remember when I started back working with the city, just a plug for him, in the TIF program in 2009, November 2009. I remember when he brought this concept to the mayor at that time to present this project and ask for the city to help with the project. So I've been around that long, but this is where it began. This site here, which used to be the Campbell's Soup plant, and then it became a city surface parking lot. And then it transformed these two sites to essentially what you see in this rendering. And then, of course, what you actually see when you drive through the area. So again, a mixed use of a hotel, apartments, retail, a garage, more retail, and across the street is a mixed use of apartments and retail on the ground floor. So awesome entertainment district. Blackstone Business District. Some of you may remember what some of the buildings look like, kind of derelict, a little underused, looked unwanted, to now a vibrant, bustling small business district. KETV talking about rehabs. So the former Burlington station, 40 years, maybe 40 years plus vacant, if you can believe that. Old structure, well built. And after the due diligence was done, they realized, yes, this can be saved and the structure could be reutilized. So here, if anyone has had a tour there, it's gorgeous. It looks great. And it's just wonderful to know that a structure built that long ago is still standing and has a new purpose, new life. Food desert area in North Omaha, 50th and Ames. Walmart was brought to the area to create jobs and to bring food as well as goods and services to the area. Another project in North Omaha, Fairdale Village, so senior housing apartments rather, and then rental housing, single family, and then the Fairdale market. So this is what it used to look like, where what you see here, it used to look like this. This is vacant land, and there was this one standing building called the Fairdale Cafe, and it was also called the Black City Hall. It was in very poor condition, and all that was able to be saved, they thought, was going to be the facade. Well, it was not really salvageable, but they saved a few things from the inside and created what you see in this rendering and then in these pictures. They actually used storage containers to create these commercial spaces and a grocery store. So that's all on PACE. I'll move quickly to, all on TIF. Quickly to PACE. So PACE is a new financing tool. State legislature, I think, approved this back in 2016, 2017. And the city's role really is to take these applications and review them based on what the law says are eligible expenses for reimbursing for energy efficient components of a project. And so my staff, Don Seaton, is facilitating and managing this program, works with our inspectors to take the application and see, are these items that they say are energy efficient, are they exceeding code? And so if it does, then, and if there are energy savings, and it needs to be, it's either a 1-to-1 or greater than 1, that ratio that we're looking for to make the project make sense for the financing. So again, new financing tool that functions much like a special tax assessment. It's based on the total energy cost savings improvements to a project. These are loans that are repaid through a property tax assessment. If you're familiar with CIDs, which are sanitary improvement districts used basically in unincorporated areas just outside the city limits. But they are assessments that apply to just one property. These payments, they're listed, and I again, I don't manage this program, but I do kind of oversee it. So this is information from Don Seaton. If you have specific questions or want to know more about the program, I have his contact information at the bottom of the slide. But one of the things he likes to point out that I often will forget is that kind of the benefit is that even though it's a loan payment, it does not show up as a debt. So it can help you when you do seek other financial assistance for your project. It will help your pro forma and allow you maybe to get more financing, other financing. They can be accelerated cannot be accelerated in the event of a default. And so because of those 2 points above, as I mentioned, they don't account against the loan to value ratio. So that's what I have on PACE, and I have taken a lot of time.
That was great. Thank you, Bridget.
I will turn
Are there
it
any
over to Pat. Oh,
I was going to say, do we want to take a quick moment? Are there any more questions on TIF or PACE before we move on? All right, Pat, it's up to you.
All right. Let me just say, with CDBG and home funding, which is what I will focus on, even though this is...
I'm going to share the screen again, sorry.
Okay.
I just need to find her information.
Yeah, even though this is a deep dive, we would have to do a deep dive because really one chapter of CDBG could take a whole day of training. So what I'm going to do is refer you to some sites where you can get additional information that has what I call in the weed information. I'm going to try to stay out of the weeds. It's a lot of information with both funding sources with regard to eligible activities, non-eligible activities, how the funding is actually used, all the restrictions, all the reporting and all that kind of thing. The best place to look would be the next slide that Bridget will pull up. It's the HUD Exchange slide. If you've not had an opportunity to look at this website, I would suggest you go here. It lists all the HUD funding programs. It has guidelines, it has tools, it has references to webinars, it has all kinds of things that you would need if you want to learn in depth the restrictions, the uses, and those kinds of things that are applicable to these funding sources. So, I would reference you here. There is a program where if you take the webinars under HUD, they track your training where you can basically have it recorded that you've gone through certain series. Because like to get a CDBG certification, you have to watch a certain number of webinars and in the stages home as well. That may become useful for you in the future. I don't know, but this is an excellent website. This is the go-to that I go to when I refer you to certain chapters in CDBG, most specifically chapter 3 and 4 of the CDBG, building CDBG, which talks about the national objectives and the reporting requirements and the actual allowable activities. I would say have that in hand. I've been doing this for 28 years, but I still have those chapters available to me when I'm usually talking to people, when I'm answering questions, usually because it does say what is eligible, what isn't, what is required. So again, I reference you to this website. Okay, we can go back. What I want to start out with, CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Funds, and home funds, home investment partnership funds. We are an entitlement city. That means that HUD allocates dollars to the city of Omaha based upon a formula that's based upon census population data, income data, housing data, and other demographic kinds of things. So we are an entitlement, which means that we get funding allocated to us every year. This year, well, let me just say in 2021, our 2021 funding for CDBG was approximately 4.5 million. The home funds was approximately 2.2 million. We use a lot of those funds for in-house programs as well as contracting with agencies and developers to run other programs. We have in the past spent a lot of the funding in-house on programs. We have shifted in the last couple of years to raising the percentage of contracting out. My opinion is that we should pay those agencies and those entities that have the capacity and the knowledge to run programs in our community far better than we could in-house. We are a technical agency, we're a governmental agency. Because we're a governmental agency, we have so many oversights that things have to go through and be done, that sometimes even the funding that we have, though it may sound good, is a barrier in itself to getting a project done. So our funding is not, the CDBG and home funding is not the answer to all. It usually is gap funding to projects. And I say that because there are so many regulatory requirements that are attached to these funding and the processes of it that sometimes it will hinder as opposed to help. But on the other hand, when it does help, again, we are gap finding, we're the but-for money usually. In talking with people, I usually ask what their plan B is because we don't know our allocations ahead of time. Like 2022 allocation, we will not know until Congress decides what that allocation will be and awards it to us. So we are going on projections, typically based upon history. There are steps in using our funds, and I guess I want to start first with the immediate step, and that is the application process for these funds, how you actually can apply for these funds. But no, not there. We'll get to that one, but not that right now. Before I say that, let me just tell you the broader view. We are, with our funding, we have to do by requirement what's called a consolidated plan, which is typically a 5-year plan. And in that 5-year plan, priorities are spelled out. And those are based upon community engagement that we have done throughout the period of time for this consolidated plan. We are coming up onto our next consolidated plan, which will be 2023, that we will have to do that 5-year plan. And a lot is tied into that. A lot of that is tied into our overall city master plan, some of our other reporting requirements, such as our affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is also a 5-year plan. We do annual action plans that talk about the annual allocation of funding and how we're going to use that each year. So we are in the process of all of that. We are currently in the process of doing our annual action plan for 2022. We just got our 2021 annual action plan approved. And again, that is for the use of the 2021 allocation. Now, all of that is to say this. The RFP, or the request for proposal process that we go through, is typically a year to a year in advance before we actually receive the funding. So if you're planning to use our funding, you have to coincide the other funding that you're going to use. If you're trying to get state funding, if you're using TIF funding, if you're using low-income housing tax credit funding, you have to look at what all their timelines are and their scheduling on how they award their funds, and then what their requirement is on the time of using them. Because our funds you're applying for typically a year to a year and a half in advance, and you will not see those funds and you will not see a contract until that time. So if you have a project that's ready to go, because you've got some other funding that says you have to spend their funding by a certain time frame and ours has not arrived yet, we cannot allow you to move forward on that project with our funding anticipated to be in it, because we have certain requirements that have to take place. So I caution you on that. Typically, planning for our funds is a year to a year and a half out, even before you apply for our funding. So as you go through and you read the chapters 3 and 4 on national objectives and what the eligible uses are and those kinds of things, you want to think in terms of, if you want to use our funding and you're unsure of our funding and what our funding can do in your project, a year advance is a good time to engage us. Me, my director, our director of planning, whatever level that you want to speak to, that is a good time to engage us, to talk about your project, to find out what other funding you're anticipating, what your project is. Does it meet our priorities? Does it meet what the community has said is a priority need? Is it going to fit within our requirement for the funding? It's a good time to engage us. So by the time that you actually are ready to apply for the RFP process, you've already got an understanding of whether your project would be something that would be competitive within that cycle. So with that being said, we do have an RFP process. The process usually starts in January when we do a grant workshop. Last year we did it virtual. This year we probably will do it again in person come 2022. Given COVID, we don't know, it may be virtual as well. But usually when we've done it in person, it basically is to go over the actual application for these funding, and to explain to you why we ask the questions we ask, why it's formatted the way that it is, and what the priorities are that you should be addressing. We will be doing the same thing come January 2022. The application is actually due the first week of April. I don't have that date as yet, but it will be the first week of April. Once the application is completed, it then is subject to review. I have a professional staff that does review the applications. At least 2 people read them. We do have a scoring matrix, which we will get back to later. Bridget kind of flashed it there for a minute. Once that scoring matrix and all the applications receive a scoring, I put together a spreadsheet and present that to the director, who then adds whatever they need to add, and then it goes to mayor and council for review and comment. At that point, the scores are presented, the comments are also presented, and then it is subject to change. We, keep in mind, we are in a governmental political atmosphere. Things do change. But what I will say is we've strived really hard to be transparent about our scoring process, about how we move forward in awarding funds to the best of our ability, trying to make sure that you feel like you have an equitable chance to be funded if your project does meet the needs that have been presented. So once it's come back to review, then we get it back, we go into a draft budget, and then we have public hearing. Public hearing then gives the public an opportunity to meet with those people that we have proposed to fund, for them to explain their projects and to look at our budget that is proposed for that year funding. Once that is done, we get it back, we complete our action plan, and then we have to then take it to council for approval. Once it's been approved by council, we then submit it to HUD for approval once we've had our allocation alerted to us from Congress. So that is the process. Again, that is for funding that would not take place and be available until the following year, usually about the fall timeframe. So when you're applying in April of 2022, you will not see the funds until the end of 2023, and particularly may not go into contract until early 2024. So it's just it's a process, and it's a process, again, that we can talk through individually if you have a project in mind. Usually projects come to us developer ready if they're larger projects. And I speak to this because one of the things you will see in our application, and I want to reference you our application, you want to pull up our website. It is on the planning website.
Okay, where do you want me to go?
Here you are, right here. You are here. Okay, this is our applications for the 2022 funding. These are old. The new ones will be put up in January for 2023 funding. We've already gone through this cycle for this funding. But this application is up because we do take applications year round. Now, we have a competitive cycle that takes place in April. Sometimes those agencies or things that we have funded do not work out, or they fall through, or they don't take place in a timely way, and we have to de-obligate funds. We still have to spend those funds. We're still under a timing, a clock ticking. So then we look at if someone has submitted an application, if we, in the applications we received in the competitive cycle are not fundable, that we did not fund and they're not fundable, then if someone has submitted an application somewhere during the year and it is a project ready that we can fund, it meets all the check marks, basically, you may be funded. And so, we leave these applications up. They don't change in real substance from year to year. So if you would say you had a project and you wanted to submit an application next month, this is the one that you would use. We cannot guarantee funding. Of course, we can never do that. I can look at it. I can notate it. If some funds become de-obligated and this is something that we can fund, you may get funded. Otherwise, I can hold it until the competitive cycle in 2023. In 2022. So just know that. So this is the one you would use if you're interested. With that being said, a little bit about the high points of the CDBG application. I mean, not application, but the CDBG funding. Typically, we have used CDBG to do multifamily rehab, multifamily construction.
Want me to go here?
Yeah, you can go there. Hey, cool. All my visuals are up here already. Okay, here's a whole list. A whole list of things that are eligible. And you can just scroll down. It's a lot of things. Again, I stress to you, if you have a particular project, it's really important maybe that you talk to us to make sure. With CDBG, there's some bench points that have to be met. The first bench point is that it has to meet a national objective. There are 3 national objectives. One is to deal with low and moderate income persons. It has to benefit. It can be slum and blight, both on area or spot, or it can be urgent need. Now, urgent need is not a category that we typically have used. We did use it with our CDBG COVID funding, because urgent need says you're responding to something that doesn't normally take place, that is of an urgent or emergency situation. What urgent need does is alleviates a lot of the reporting requirement. And so it's not really used very often. You really have to justify that there's no other funding available for it, that it is of something of an urgent need. So typically the categories that we use are blight, slum and blight, or more certainly the benefit to low and moderate income persons. Most of the projects that we do come under that category, unless they're street projects or there's site clearances or there's some kind of commercial facade or rehab program, which is done typically under under slum and blight. Slum and blight does have a definition of what that means. And if the properties don't meet that, both on the area and the spot blight definition, it cannot be done there. So what's real important with your project is that you look at what those national objectives are. That's chapter 3. And you can Google chapter 3 and it'll come up. For chapter 3 CDBG, and it'll come up, and it talks about the national objectives. Your project must meet one of those national objectives. Typically, it will meet a low to moderate income if that's the population you're trying to serve. A lot of the allowable activities are categorized under these national objectives. And so when we're looking at your project, we are looking at the national objective. How will it meet the national objective? We are looking at what allowable activity under that national objective it is serving. We are also looking at the priorities that were set forth by our community engagement. Community engagement was real important in that we have asked people, special group focus group meetings, public hearings, surveys, those kinds of things to tell us what they see are the priorities within our community. Now, of course, the priorities usually always come up the same, and that's housing, affordable housing, and it's usually economic development in some level. So I can tell you basically what we have funded continually over the years, the various kinds of projects. We do public services under CDBG funding as well. Public services can be social services, they can be housing counseling, they can be job training, all of that comes under public services. Job creation is economic development. So, we have, right now, we do fund 3 job training programs. They reach a large majority of the young people in our Omaha area. The projects do go up to the age of 21. They do focus on training young people to be eligible for hiring, permanent hiring, and more specifically the ones on the higher end of the age. It's an opportunity. All 3 programs are providing, one of the programs is providing job training opportunity to homeless individuals while they are receiving additional services as well as housing. So that takes up a large percentage of our public service. Under CDBG, there is a cap for public service, and that's 15%. That means you cannot spend more than 15% of your allocation and program income on public services. So that is a very, very competitive category. We have a special or a separate application for that under the CDBG. There's 2 applications on the website, and you would see one specifically for public service because that is a very competitive category, and it does require a different kind of budgeting because you're usually talking about staff and some sort of social services. The other application deals more with hard construction costs or things more conducive to development. All right, so Bridget is scrolling through this, and this you'll see this. You're on the website still, right?
Uh-huh.
She's still okay. All of this is on the website, but you can also find this again on HUD Exchange. This is where it came from. This is nothing originated by me. So in any case, I would direct you there. I could direct you to our website that has a lot of this information. As you see, there's the listing there of available resources. Please avail yourself of those. See, there you go.
Sorry.
She's making me a PowerPoint and I didn't even do it. There she goes. I tell you, teamwork makes the dream work. Anyway, here we go. So this becomes, I keep pointing to this because ultimately this will stop your application if we cannot get through this part. We're right here. Okay, so typically with CDBG, we were doing a multifamily rehab, multifamily new construction. We have done site improvement, streetscapes, those kinds of things. We have done some commercial facades, commercial rehab. We do job training programs under our public service. We've also have some micro enterprise under economic development. Those things are things that have been addressing our priorities as stated by our public engagement. Some of them have been funded for multi-years. Some of them have been funded a one time. With our funding, we do not commit multiple years. It is competitive each and every year. I would not plan to submit something that needs to be funded for multiple years. One of the questions I say is, what is your plan B? How are you going to be sustainable? How is this project going to be sustainable without us once we've put our funding in? Again, our funding is usually gap funding. So, if you're doing a multifamily project, it typically is millions. And our little money is truly lunch money in that millions. But our little money will drive the requirements. It will drive the property standards. It will drive the reporting. It will drive how you do your construction and your business. It's a lot of requirement. But again, sometimes our money is the but-for money. You really do need it. So just keep that in mind.
Hey, Pat.
Yes.
We had a question about, is there a possibility to submit an application off cycle? Would it still be reviewed, or would it be held till the next cycle?
That's what I was saying. Yes, it can be submitted off cycle. I can review it. I will review it. I will read it. But unless we have some funding that's available, like the obligated funding, or we have some program income that comes in that we can consider to fund it, it will sit until the next cycle. And then I will email come next cycle and say, do you wish this to be submitted for the next cycle? So, it has happened. We are currently funding 2 projects on money that we got for program income and money that was deobligated from another project that could not meet the timeline. We are funding some applications that did come in after the cycle. As a result, we needed the money spent and we needed a project ready to go, and that's what we got. So yes, I would say yes, you can do that. I would not submit it with the expectation of being funded. And I would not submit it with the expectation of having other funding hinged on our funding, because you're out of cycle and that may or may not happen. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Certainly. Okay. Is there any other questions? Any other questions on that? Okay, so when you're looking at CDBG funding, CDBG is designed basically to service low to moderate income people. Everything that we're doing basically serves low to moderate income people. And under the guidelines, that's 80% of the area median income as established by HUD. Now, there's all kinds of AMIs, or area median incomes, from various sources and everything. So I say that, and I usually say the median family income as established by HUD, and HUD issues those guidelines for us. We do use the home funded income guidelines for CDBG. Home guidelines are the most restrictive, and we do use the most restrictive guidelines in reporting and in our income and rents. And that is home across the board for the programs that we fund. So with that being said, CDBG says 70% of your activities or your funding has to be spent on low and moderate income benefit. That comes with documentation at initial benefit receipt. Now that's when you're dealing with people like rent or rental projects. The people are eligible at the time of renting, unlike with home funding, and I'll talk about home here in a minute. People look at CDBG as very, very flexible. It is very, very flexible, but within that flexibility, there is still a lot of restriction. I'm in meetings where people throw, well, why don't you just use CDBG, or why can't we use CDBG, or all that. Sometimes in cities, CDBG develops what I call the bright and shiny. You can point to a building and say that was CDBG funded, or you can point to a project and say that was CDBG funded. But sometimes CDBG funds go places where you can't see. Like the programs that we have is homeowner occupied rehab. At one point we were doing what was called full rehab, and we were actually fully rehabbing the inside of people's homes. That's not a bright and shiny. Nobody knows that except for the people who live there. And so there's a misconception that CDBG funds are not being spent in particular areas because you don't see it. When we do site clearance, it's usually the site clearance of a ground that a house is going to be built on. So all you see is dirt. That's not a bright and shiny. That's dirt until you see a new house, which is typically built with home funds. And so there's a lot of misconception in terms of how CDBG functions and what it actually is available to do. What we have done in the past is a lot of that preparatory kinds of thing, the site clearing, the street scapes, the rehabs that are taking place inside houses. When you're talking about a lot of our internal programs are rehab programs where we have gone in and modified kitchens and bathrooms and done major systems like electrical and plumbing. We have since changed that to an exterior program for various reasons. One, it's a quicker program. It's not quite as costly, and you can see it. It does improve the overall neighborhood and community because it is doing exterior projects. We do emergency projects where people need water heaters and furnaces. That's pretty much how that addresses it, or sewer problems from the house to the street. We have energy efficient programs, but again, that's usually on the interior of the house. We also fund a handyman program, for elderly people. And that basically is what it is, a handyman program where an elderly person cannot change the light or change the doorknob or change the lock or needs some handyman kinds of things. And those are not bright and shinies, but they are the necessities. They are the things that people in our communities do need. Our home funds, on the other hand, are reserved most particularly with housing activities and everything that's associated with that. And we have in the past typically funded our new construction with home funding. We have in the past typically funded our rental rehab projects with home funding. We do have an investor rental rehab program where we do have a match program where investors that own vacant properties can rehab that property and put in an eligible tenant. Thank you, Bridget. Okay. Again, like CDBG, home funds again come with a lot of requirements. And again, home is more stringent on their requirements. It does have a property standard that does have to be met. It does have a subsidy level, which means there's only a certain amount of money that you can put into a project, a maximum amount. There is a maximum market value that you can sell the house for once you have constructed it. There is a limit because home funds do not do luxury housing or what's considered to be luxury housing. Again, home funds is focused on 80% and under. That is maximum. However, for rental projects that are done with home construction, the focus is 60% and under. 90% of the home funds that is put to rental assistance or rental rehab, it's 90% is 60% and under of the MFI or AMI. As determined by HUD. And again, those are charts that come out that designate that annually.
Hey, Bridget, are you intending to share your screen right now?
Geez, yeah, are you?
Oh, yes, am I not?
You are not. I just want to make sure that we're.
Because I'm seeing a whole lot of screens.
I know. I saw you looking up at the screen. I just want to. I'm like, I want to see what you're seeing. That's okay.
My apology. I didn't realize I got
okay, why don't you don't have to keep up with me. Again, I reference you to the HUD exchange and to the home program basics. Yeah, it's there. Good place to go. This is on our website, the planning website as well. Okay, and you want to avail yourself of this information. Those are the, yeah. Okay, yeah, she's going through this. Let me just say with home, we do new construction with home. When you're using home funds for new construction, you have to keep in mind there are some site restrictions where you have to look at the composition of the neighborhood, whether it is, there's a limited amount of minority concentration and low income concentration where we cannot build. And that's not to say we have never, because we've asked waivers from HUD. It seems kind of contradictory in the very areas where you want to form home ownership. There is a regulation that says you can't put it there. So we have fought that. So it is, if you have a project and it is in what's called an impacted area, that's what they're calling an impacted area, where there's a high concentration of minority or high concentration of low income, they do not want you to build more low income housing, basically. We have argued that point, because even in those areas, you still need new construction of both rental and home ownership. So like I said, we have used in the past our home funds basically for home ownership. We do provide down payment assistance. Down payment assistance is something that you can do under the home program. It's usually tied to the new construction projects that we have funded. We usually have funded nonprofit agencies to construct those housing. We've also funded private contractors to do new construction. We do have a couple programs like that as well. So, a lot of people don't think of home if you're thinking about housing construction. And I would encourage you to look at that. If it is new construction, we do provide down payment assistance. Once the home buyer is in there, what kicks in is what's called an affordability period. Again, home has a lot of requirement. The affordability period that comes with home programs or home projects that are funded is an affordability period. And that's based upon the amount of home funding into a project. And that can be a 5, 10, or 15-year period. And what that means is the intention is to keep that project affordable for a length of time. That's the whole intent. So if it's a homeowner, they typically have a 15-year, because of our DPL, our deferred payment loan, have a 15-year affordability period, which means that is their principal place of residence for 15 years. And that basically is to provide stabilization to the community and stabilization in that neighborhood. And people aren't flipping houses, basically. Again, it's based on the amount of subsidy that they receive. But once that homeowner does that, hopefully they do stay there for that period of time. If they don't, they sell, they pay the city back what is not depreciated on their deferred payment loan, and they can sell to any homeowner. So then it does allow either more low income people, low moderate income people moving in, or it does allow for now mixed income neighborhoods. So you're not creating just all low income neighborhoods. There's an opportunity. And as proven, a lot of the houses that we have now funded are now appreciating in this market, which is good, because now the homes are no longer a liability, they are an asset, which is what they should be, where it's allowing someone to sell their home and take that money and invest yet in another home, which now leaves that house available for someone else to come in, hopefully, and have some home ownership opportunity. So, when we're looking at home rental, again, that's 60% and under. Home rental has restrictions on rent. That rent changes annually in terms of the HUD allowable rent. It also has income restrictions to 80% and under. If a project uses home, like a multifamily, you will be reporting annually on your tenants. But with home funds, unlike CDBG funds, home funds, there are designated units. So you can do multi-income or mixed income projects, because home has a designation. You could potentially have like 40 units and only 4 be home designated, and the rest could be market. Or in a lot of cases, people use low-income housing tax credits as another leveraging program in a project. So, home is very good. It does leverage other funds. It does come in and play well with other funds. Does have requirements that are sometimes aligned, like the low-income housing tax credit also has stringent regulations. So home, if you're doing LIHTC funds, home funds are right up there, usually typically used in the same project, but you may only have a limited number of home units that you actually have to report on annually through the affordability period. Again, the rents are restricted and those do change annually, as does the income. So I want to point these funds to you. Most people come to us for CDBG funds until I say, what about home funds? Home funds do not have to meet a national objective. They just have to be an eligible activity. And you do have to meet all the reporting requirements. So, I reference you to the HUD Exchange and to this, our website, to look in additional opportunities for you to use these funds.
Hey, Pat, there's a couple of
Yes.
questions come in. Are home applications year round, or are they, is there any application period?
Home funds is the same application as a CDBG.
Perfect.
Okay,
And
you can
then,
request the home, let me just say, you can request the home funds. You can even request the CDBG funds. When we look at your application, we see where they best fit. Okay,
perfect.
you may think CDBG and it actually ends up home. That would be part of our offer, because if it fits where funds are available, that's where we're going, and it fits within the dynamics of the requirement, that's kind of where we're going to put it.
That's great. And then this next question, I'm just going to read it. I'm not sure I understand which program it's talking about. It says, is there a credit requirement or criteria for investors? Will personal credit or business credit have criteria?
Okay, investors who want to do what? Do they want to put in an application for the RFP cycle, or are they interested in our internal investor rehab program? Which one are you speaking to?
Michael, do you want to unmute yourself and clarify?
Yes, thank you. My name is Michael Jefferson. And actually, since you mentioned both, could you give information on both requirements, please?
All right. For an investor who is going to apply through the RFP process, okay, let me just say that because it is a competitive process, if it's more geared to larger projects. If you have an individual project, that's probably better suited for a smaller internal program. That's the first thing. If we are looking on the RFP side, credit, financial stability, there are some development schedules, there's some development budgets. We do look at audits. We look at all of those kinds of things within the RFP process. So the answer to that is yes. Are we looking at your credit score? No. What we're looking for is, if you are an investor coming in as a business entity, we will pull that business entity credit report. If it does not have a credit report, we will look at your individual, because we have to look at the stability of financing. And are you loanable? Are you able to get the other funding that it's going to take to make this happen? Have you got proven history of maintaining your loans, paying your bills? That you can't have tax liens and those kinds of things. On the individual side in our program, we do pull credit. If you are coming in as a business entity, if you are an individual who owns your own home that you're trying to rehab and then rent out to an eligible tenant, we will probably pull credit as well. It's not looking at credit scores, it's looking more at financial stability. Again, we want to make sure that you are current on taxes, that there's no tax liens and those kinds of things. But let me just say this, and on our internal investor rehab program, the intent is to take existing vacant property, rehab it, and have available housing that meets property standard available to low and moderate income tenants. What's attached to you is, we're not qualifying it based on you, we're qualifying it based on the tenant. There has to be an eligible tenant. That is the beneficiary of the funding that we're putting into your rental rehab. So even if you sell it within the affordability period, the subsequent buyer still is held to the affordability period, because the intent of our dollars going in that property is to maintain decent, safe, affordable housing for low to moderate income people. So, it's a rental project. It provides good standard housing for a lower moderate income person. And that's 80% and under, with affordable rents as determined by HUD. through a certain amount of period, 5, 10, or 15-year period. So we do get information on the investor, but really what qualifies is that you're providing housing for an eligible tenant. Does that answer your question?
Yes, we have a note in the chat that answered it.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you have any? Oh, yeah.
More questions? It's easier to answer questions. If you have questions, please ask. It's easier to answer questions rather than just kind of prattle off the regulations, because you can, like I said, you can avail yourself of those regulations. And there is just a lot of them. So for me, I can touch on the high points of them, but really you just kind of need to get in there and see where your project may fit. And then call me and we can meet and talk further once you figure out where you're going with it. Okay. I would point you to the application. The application's questions are based upon the underwriting requirements for these funding. HUD has underwriting requirements that we have to document that have been reviewed. And let me just, the questions that are asked, like, what is your community involvement? What other projects have you done like this? So we can determine whether this is your first project or whether you are capable of doing this kind of project. What is your finances? And we ask for a lot of finance information. What's your legal structure? What is your staff capacity to do this kind of program and project? Have you involved yourself in the community? Have you even talked with community where you want to do this project to know that you have people understanding and supporting you in this effort, so that you're just not going into a community and plopping something in there? We're looking for that. We're looking for the capacity to complete the project. So let me just say this, we are not the very beginning entity for funding. We can't afford to do that. We are on a timeline. Funds have to be spent, requirements have to be met. You have to somewhat be, I won't say seasoned, but you do have to have your ducks in a row. You need to, if you don't have the expertise, you need to get someone on your team that does. Someone who's familiar with fundraising, someone who's familiar with the other kind of funding that you're going to have to get for your project, someone who is familiar with construction. If you don't have that expertise, please build your team with that expertise, because that would help you get ready for us. We are not a beginning project. We are not. I can't put that to you any clearer. We cannot take the risk of someone who doesn't know what they're doing or really just has a great idea but has not fleshed it out. We can't afford to take the risk with the funding, because if your project fails, we have to pay HUD back those funds. And we can't afford to do that for the public or for us as well. So again, it's about partnershiping, it's about collaborating, it's understanding where your weaknesses are and how you build your development team around that, so that when you come to us for the funding, you have someone who understands the process of development. That takes, like I said, that's usually a year of thought process and development before you even come to us for funding. And then you've got another year to kind of pull all together, because when we write an agreement, all your funding has to be in place for that project. It's not just a comment, it has to be there. We cannot fund a project that doesn't have all its funding in place, and we are not assured that there's capacity there to complete that project. So
maybe this would be a good time, if you don't have any other thoughts about this, Pat, I'd love to get that voice in the room of someone who has experience with these different funding sources. Is it okay if we turn it over to Mike?
Yep. Shut me up.
Thank you very much.
Stop sharing.
Information. I have not spent much time on the CDBG. I've been around it, but I've never done a project, and especially that last bit of advice of having a strong team is pretty important, because as she mentioned, it's really difficult to put some of these funding agencies in a predicament, and it would be a terrible problem if one of the projects doesn't go forward for the wrong reasons, at least. So that's really good advice, and that was interesting. I'd like to just kind of open it all up for questions, but I got a couple of points that I'd like to hit on. I'm primarily, mostly I've worked with Bridget, mostly on TIF, and we did a PACE deal, one of the early PACE deals too. We're Shamrock Development. We are urban mixed-use developers, mostly in downtown Omaha. We've done the Capitol District was our latest project. As mentioned by Bridget, we did the Paxton Building, the Barker Building, new construction apartments at 1501 Jackson, plus some smaller buildings, 1000 Dodge, and where DJ's Dugout is on Capitol. So we've done small, medium, and large projects, and we've been through the process for quite a few years. That makes me sad, though, that the Capitol District project was basically the entirety of Bridget's career, because we've worked together a long time, and that's how long it took. So it's a big project and a long project, but that's what it takes for some of these things. You think they're going to happen tomorrow. In that time, we ended up having twin boys and raising them. They're 8 years old now. So it's funny to how long it takes to keep that in mind as you're committing to a project, you're committing to something like that. So fun, the TIF, I think a couple of things I'd like to point out is on the note side of it, this, as Bridget mentioned, the city commits to you to give all that money back for that period of years. And then we usually go monetize that at a bank. So then they're going to pay us those biannual tax payments back, and we'll go to a bank and say, hey, for the next 15 years, or usually 13 years because of the valuation has to go up, and can we borrow money and pay you back over this 13-year period? And then they give us the principal amount that we're able to put into the project. If I'm not mistaken, I think you don't have to have a redevelopment note with a bank. You can just keep the money as if you can afford to do it without it, and but it does then help the bottom line. Either way, the project needs that support, whether it's cash up front or if it's helps on the cash flow over to the 15-year period. And then the other important thing I think Bridget mentioned was the but-for analysis. You really have to make sure that you can prove that this project would not go forward without the assistance of TIF. And I think some people, I don't want to say take it for granted, but you kind of skip over that step. And just ideologically, you really do need to look at that to make sure that it is the case, because you can go pretty far down the road and find out that have some questions asked to you by some of the boards or city council or whatever as you're going through the process. And you just got to make sure that you do understand that that's committed. I'm not going to get into the TIF eligible expenses. I think Bridget did a good job on that. And then with PACE, I think the pacing was interesting. PACE is a really good, I think the easiest way to put it is it's less expensive mezzanine debt. So, and mezz debt, as you know, is like investor money, which could be really high interest rate money. And so because you're going to invest into this building for some upgraded energy saving components or whatever the case would be, and make the property that much better, you can also then, instead of borrowing that money from mezzanine debt people, you can make it fit into this program, and that's going to bring your cost of that debt down quite a bit and layer into as one of your income, one of the sources of development money from the beginning. As it mentioned, it's not personally guaranteed, and it gets paid with taxes though. So that's the advantage to the PACE investor, is no matter what, it will get paid, just like taxes, no matter what, do get paid. They may be delayed or there could be some issues, but they do get paid. So that's a pretty good element. You got to be careful and make sure that everybody understands your sources and uses of funds, to make sure that the bank understands it and things like that, because in some cases it could affect your debt service coverage ratio and things like that when you're meeting with the bank. So I think that's Bridget did a great job on the TIF and the PACE and all the other things. So at this point, I'm really just going to open it up for questions so that I can answer questions more so than try to continue to tell you more than you've already heard.
I think that's great. We're just excited to have your experience in the room, Mike.
Angela, I'm sorry. Can I just jump in real quick? Mike, thank you for talking about the but-for, because I did not cover that. And I don't know if subconsciously I just put it in the back of my head as I don't even want to talk about it, but it is important. So thank you for touching on that. And what I wanted to say about that is, so it comes up, it's the but for is somewhat subjective. And the reason I say that is when we look at our TIF projects, it's not just, okay, does this project check the boxes for what the community development law says a TIF project has to check the boxes for? So yes, it must comply with the community development law, but one of the other key components that I like to emphasize even more is it in compliance with the city's master plan? Now that's a very general, broad brush type perspective. But when I say that, I am taking into effect, there are several elements of the master plan, and the ones that I emphasize for our projects, redevelopment projects, are the transportation element, the urban design element, the environment element, of course, the housing element. All of those are taken into account when we're looking at a project. When a applicant is bringing a project to us, that's in the back of our head is, okay, is this going to meet, comply, align with these goals that are in the master plan, in these elements that had public input? That's one. Two, there are also area redevelopment plans that a lot of these projects are in that involve public input. So that is a consideration when we're talking about the but for. Is it meeting that? And then there are some studies and some specific goals that the city has that it wants to meet in terms of, we want to make sure we see this particular area developed in this particular manner with these kinds of projects. So all of those things are in the back of our heads when we're talking with the potential applicant developer, when we're having our pre-app meetings. And so therefore the but for is, okay, you maybe can develop that project, that property at that site without city help. But once you come to us, it's a whole different conversation, because you're sitting down with our planners, our public works folks, and if you will, and Mike has intimate knowledge of this, we're scrutinizing that and really trying to get a better project than maybe what is on paper. And again, it's because we're trying to get that project to align and check with, or check the boxes of the master plan, the elements, area redevelopment plan, city goals, so forth. And so for that reason, I say it can be more, it can sound or seem subjective, but we're really looking at all of these things that will make that project an even better, hopefully, and more desirable project for the public to enjoy. So it is more than, oh, you know, this developer has the money. They could redevelop that site. And maybe what they initially had on paper, they could redevelop or they could develop. But when you apply all of our master plan ideas, goals, and the site regulators, it can become a different project that might kill a project if they didn't have an incentive such as TIF. So I just wanted to make that point.
Oh, that's good. And the last thing I'd say about TIF is Omaha as a community and as a city was really suburbanized more than many cities in our size and age are, just had massive amounts of suburbans and not enough urban development. So to kind of get it out of this suburban hole, for lack of a better term, and to try to expedite more urban development, TIF has been a great tool. And what it's done is it's sped some of these things up, and it's made some things happen that would not have happened if we did not invest in TIF. And why was it important? I mean, most city studies feel that a strong urban core is extremely important for any city to continue to grow. And so to kind of get that back up to a level that it goes on, it's great. And then it's also provided much more jobs, much more commitment to the urban core by philanthropists, which have just been remarkable lately. And the last thing I would say about that is that Omaha is from downtown to midtown. Our urban core is pretty well connected. And it's fairly well close. There'll be some new transportation things that probably should occur, but for the most part, we're not that spread out, the Dodge Street corridor, and we've got some good densities around this middle corridor. So when things are happening, it does make other things happen too. Midtown Crossing, for instance, it did cause other buildings in the area to occur and happen faster, bigger, better, and stronger. So you do see an anchor project like that come in that could really make a difference in a neighborhood.
Great. We do have some questions coming in through the chat, so I'm just going to field these, and some of them are directed at individuals and some of them are up for grabs for anyone. So feel free to jump in, panelists. I have a question for Mike. What's your best piece of advice for somebody who is new to real estate development? Maybe about this or just in general.
Yeah, I think when I got into the business, I learned by working for others. And that's pretty much the best way you're going to do it, is if you can learn. I was a real estate broker with Investors Realty for many, many, many years too. And that was interesting because it was commission only, meaning you eat what you kill. And if you don't get much for dinner. So you did learn a lot, and that was a long time ago, but it's still pretty much the case for the competitive nature of that side. But the interesting part was I would work for a developer trying to find commercial tenants. I would learn so much about businesses, but I also learn about the development side of things as well. So I think finding a good mentor company that has the ability to and the interest in you personally, that would allow you to grow and just kind of jump in with both feet and start learning. You'll also find out that you bring something to the table, and you need to discover what that is. If you're really good on numbers and spreadsheets, but you don't know which end of the hammer to use, that's fine. Some people, on the other hand, are the other way around. They know which end of the hammer to use, but need to learn more about the spreadsheets. So that's probably the best way that could do it. People used to say start small, like buy a house or a duplex or something like that. I think you can learn more working for another company before you it's always good advice to buy, a house or duplex if you can think you can handle it and get into it. But, for the actual stuff of what Bridget, everybody's talking about here, and Tiff and things like that, you need to probably jump in with a company that can help open up the door, bigger doors faster.
Great. And then I guess this is for everyone. We know that there are many stumbling blocks that developers occur in their projects. Maybe Bridget and Pat, you could talk about what are some easy stumbling blocks to avoid when they're seeking financing or funding with the city for their project. And Mike, if you have any personal recollections on past stumbling blocks that you've overcome that you'd like to share with us, that would be great too.
I think with CDBG, I think one of the largest things we see when people come to us with a project is that they have not really fleshed out their financials in terms of sources of other funding. Usually it takes a while to keep reworking that budget and understanding what the real cost is. You have to work alongside with someone in construction who can give you, a point of reference for cost. When we're looking at it, the comments that I typically hear is like it's an unrealistic budget. They don't understand the real cost of development. Who's doing that estimate? Where is that coming from? I think connecting and understanding the sources again and what that means to them and the timing of that is real important for us, because that's one of the things we have to look at, is that you have the ability to get the matching funds to make this project happen. And a lot of that is long-term planning, because again, if you're looking for LIHTC funding or you're looking for TIF funding or whatever, TIF turns around a lot faster than the other funding sources, but it still has an application period and a review period. And you have to understand how that all is going to come together, because that's what you needed to do, come together to make your project move forward. Because like I said, we cannot contract until all of that is together. So that will delay your project. We may say it's a great project, but you still got a year of work here, to come back to us. And that may not coincide with what you have in your head in terms of accomplishing that project. So, or commitments to other funders or other people. So, yeah, it's real important.
I would 100% agree with everything Pat said. And if I added anything, I think having done this for a few years, experience is key. Although I and my staff have the ability to handhold, one of the differences between the TIF program, what I do in our programs, economic development, and the funding that Pat manages is that timing factor. So as Pat mentioned, they're under the gun. They've got to spend that money. And if they don't spend that money or aren't able to spend the money and or have given the money and you haven't been able to spend it, there's an obligation on the city, and the city does not want to be in that type of position. But with TIF and PACE, there's no money that the city, is giving you up front. So it puts the onus and all responsibility on you as that applicant to, as she said, have your ducks in a row. Having some experience with construction is helpful, I think. Property ownership, property management is important. But development, pulling it all together is really what a developer does. So it helps to have that experience. So that way, when you come to the city to say, hey, I've got this property I want to redevelop, you already know I've got to have a development team that I have assembled to help me think through all of those steps. So that when I come to the city, meet with them, I'll have a better, broader picture of what I am actually doing. And then when it comes to the application process, it's really just more of a process than, oh, I didn't understand that this is financing, so I need to have all my financing in place. Oh, so experience will help in that matter. And as Mike said, if you can find mentors, that's a great help. And of course, I'm gonna give a plug for the Spark Developer Academy. If you're not a part of the Spark Developer Academy, you need to become a part of the Spark Developer Academy, because I think it's going to put you in touch with some great mentors, a great network of people, and even your cohorts that you go through the program with will become strong mentors for each other. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
If I can just add one more thing, I'm playing through my mind what we typically struggle with. And one of them is focus. When you apply to us, we need to know what you're really asking for. Sometimes we get applications, looks really good, but it's all over the place in terms of what the wishes are, what the dreams are, what that project is. And we're trying to figure out where can we fit in all of that, because there's no real clarity in terms of what you're asking us for. And that delays you. That could possibly keep you out from being funded on a potentially really good project because you're not focused on what it is you really want from us. And again, we're usually part of a larger activity. When we get, for instance, if you're trying to do rehab and you've got all this vision for this particular building and all of that kind of thing, does your budget support all of this vision? And are you just throwing things at us to say, well, pick one that you can fund? No, I mean, I look at it and I'll say, like, what is it they want us to fund? What in here? Because I look at things in terms of projects. What is it that you want us to fund? If it's a larger project, what part of that are you asking us to focus on? Because some activities we can't fund. We're not certainly going to be able to fund all of it. Let me just say this, we very rarely fund 100% anything. We just don't have that kind of funding. So, I'm looking to say, what is an eligible activity that we can fund within the scope of what you're proposing? If it is a project that is only one activity, that's fine. Just be focused what that is. Don't throw us a wish list and then think we're going to pick something out of there and go, yeah, well, I think we can fund that, so let's fund them. That's not how that happens. So You know, that will typically take a developer or someone with experience to hone you down to a real project that can be financed. Because a bank or a lending institution or anybody else is going to want to know exactly what are their funding, what's the deliverables. They're going to want to need to know that. And we're asking the same question. What's the deliverable? You know, what is it that we're really putting our money into, so that I can then figure out how we have to track it in reporting and otherwise. So, yeah.
That's
Great.
all real good advice. And I would say too, developers provide vision and leadership. Shamrock, we've done hundreds of millions of dollars of project. I have like 4 or 5 employees. Okay, we are the king of outsource. You know, to be able to go down to the city and deal with a certain thing, you need the right lawyers. To go to the banks, you need different lawyers. To go to banks, you need to have good construction contracts and numbers. So it's really, you know, at the same time, we're not building duplexes. If I'm building a duplex, that could be something that you could be mentored along, and, you know, Bridget would build. It's a little extreme discussion here, but my point is, I couldn't afford all these people, the best architects and the biggest lawyers and everything, to build a duplex. But there's somewhere in between there is what you need to do, is assemble a good team, get your numbers down. And by the time you go into the city, you're going to need to have pretty much everything kind of a pretty good, clear vision of where you're going, because it's a big hill to climb too. And to climb there and not get the project going is a little disappointing. So it helps everybody just to make sure you have a good, solid team. And that's why I was encouraging you to kind of go out and work for a company that can do it, because everybody's always looking for good people, and you can learn a lot more at a higher level from the beginning than necessarily the School of Hard Knocks. There's a couple of questions over here on the right too. I see nonprofits, typically, if they own their buildings and real estate, they do not pay real estate taxes. So that would not work for TIF, but it would work for PACE, if I'm not mistaken. I think if you have a charity that is doing some remodeling in a building, you could pay for that through a PACE loan. Bridget, maybe you would understand that?
I think so. We haven't had any of those examples yet, but you're right. PACE is not based off of taxes. So I think that's possible.
And then typically for the kind of work and effort you'd have to do for the PACE loan, you still got to pay it back. So it'd be, if you're a nonprofit, you might want to find someone to donate the money if you can. But if you're trying to bridge a final reconstruction project together, that might be something to look at. The TIF cover a percentage of the coverage of all costs associated within the criteria. So actually, it's really important to look at as TIF, you qualify for TIF, and they'll say, okay, we're going to give you the taxes back for the next 15 years. And then we do the math backwards, and we take that to the bank, and the bank says, okay, here's the amount of money you can pay back over the next 15 years with this expected tax payment. So then they give us the money, and we put it in as a sources. So let's say we have a $100,000 project. My guess is about 8 to 10,000 of it, 8 to 10% of that cost would be the TIF amount. It could be higher depending on the size of the project and things like that, but about 10%. So instead of having to put, if you're borrowing 70 and you're gonna need 30 to put in %, you'd have 10%. So you only need 20% then to get your project off the ground. And what it does do, that but-for test would show you that in order to get that 20% of investor money, they have more, now you have more return to give to them. So then that way they'll be interested in returning, because if the return's not high enough, you're not gonna be able to build the project or get the investors. So that's where that but-for test is. Will this happen but for getting TIF? Well, because you're getting a return on only 20% of the money as opposed to 30, that's the thing that can push these over the edge to make them TIF eligible. I hope that answered the question.
And I might just add, so Mike is absolutely great with those numbers. I mean, he knows them in the back of his head. As he said, he's done hundreds, thousands, maybe projects, maybe not thousands yet.
No, not thousands, but not that either, but they've been big, so you're right.
Hundreds of projects. And so I guess what I would say is, as he's talking about the but for, and if I were to see if I can make this simplistically in my head, When we receive an application, we will figure out if the amount of TIF that we're going to approve that will be paid over that 15 years. We have a spreadsheet, and some of you may have seen that, but we have a spreadsheet that, as Mike said, kind of backs into how much TIF will the project support. And that's the way I say it. How much TIF will the project support? It's based off of, one, the valuation that that project creates. And if you, another way to think about it is when you go to a bank to get a loan for a car or a house, they're looking at your income. How much income do you have, and how much of a house will you be able to afford based on that income? Or how much car can you afford based on that income? So it's kind of that same thought process with the TIF. Based on the tax revenue that is generated, the new tax revenue that's generated, and then we apply an interest rate, which is the bank interest rate. So presuming they're going to get a bank loan to monetize it, to then back into, okay, this amount of revenues will be supported by this amount of a loan. So that kind of gives us the full amount of TIF that is eligible for that project. Now, if it's new construction, maybe TIF eligible costs, because you got to think about that secondly. So first, how much TIF total? Now, what are the TIF eligible costs? You may not have enough TIF eligible costs to utilize all of that TIF. So maybe 100,000, to keep the number simple, maybe 100,000 of TIF is eligible and supportable by your project, but maybe you only have $75,000 of TIF eligible costs. Only $75,000 of TIF eligible costs will be approved. So hopefully that answers the question. And then I see another one about upon completion, can TIF be transferred to another project or sold with the project? Yes, I will say that, and Mike has probably experienced this. I personally, I don't like when that happens, because I love for the projects to stay together. We've worked hard with that original applicant, but it does happen, and it's totally plausible. So.
I'm not sure I knew that. I'm not sure I knew that.
Okay. Uh-oh, I've given you some.
That means all of our projects went through, so there.
That's right.
But yeah, that's right. And when it says sold is interesting. If we sell a project and we have a loan on it, we make the new buyers take over that TIF loan so that the responsibility follows the property.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you all for your time. We are right at the lunch hour. Thank you to Pat and to Bridget and to Mike for lending us your expertise for these last 2 hours. We are so grateful to have your support here at Spark. And Bridget, thanks for the plug for the Developer Academy. Your check's in the mail. This project wouldn't be anything without you. So thank you so much, or this program wouldn't be. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope everybody has a great day. Stay cool. And we'll see you hopefully at the next deep dive.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.